then our first speaker, Dr. Eric Williams, and then another introduction of our respondent. And then Dr. Denise Janssen will offer a response, and then we'll move into Q&A. And we will have faculty ask faculty to have the priority for the Q&A. If there's any extra time, we'll certainly allow students to send in a question as well. We'll cue you to that if there is time. We will have, after that, new faculty introductions from our 4 of our deans, and then we'll move into faculty interest groups. And you've been pre-assigned to groups, and we hope that you have fruitful conversations. Your group facilitators know how to proceed. Just shared protocol for this Zoom meeting. Please silence yourself, mute your speaker unless you are entering a question. You may use the chat box to submit your questions later on, but in your small groups you will need to unmute and have conversations together. I think we are ready to begin. I just want to invite us to have a word of prayer, if I may. Holy God, we ask your blessing this night. Grant us wisdom, grant us discernment, grant us courage to action. Bless all those who are with us and all who cannot be with us. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. Amen. I'd like to invite Dr. Michael Koppel of Wesley Theological Seminary, who is the chair of our Council of Deans who are sponsoring this gathering, to give you his welcome.
Well, on behalf of the whole Council of Deans, I welcome you to this virtual Faculties Convocation. First time ever to do this, and we're delighted you're here. So the program is a full one, and I'm delighted you're part of it. So welcome.
Thank you, Michael. And now I would like to invite Dean Gregory Howard of Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University to introduce our primary speaker.
Good evening. I find it a great privilege to introduce a friend, a peer, a colleague, a great asset within the discourse of theological education to each of you all tonight. He is the Reverend Dr. Eric Lewis Williams. He is an ordained minister of the Church of God in Christ. Dr. Williams holds his undergraduate studies from the University of Illinois, his Master's of Arts in Theological Studies from McCormick, a Master of Divinity from Duke, and the Doctorate of Philosophy and Religious Studies from the University of Edinburgh in the United Kingdom. He has taught history, theology, and African American studies at several institutions, including Western Theological Seminary, Ashland, Iowa State, Shaw, Boston College, Harvard, and shares on the teaching team now at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University. He currently serves as well as the curator of religion for the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, of course, in Washington, D.C. He is the co-editor of T&T Clark Handbook of African American Theology, and is currently as well completing a manuscript which explores theological significance and significations in African American Pentecostal thought. I present to some, introduce to others, Dr. Eric Williams.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much for your kind invitation and for the opportunity to be here with you in this virtual space. I'm very honored to be here with you. I've been in the DC area now about going on 4 years, and I've had the privilege since being here of I've taught, of course, over at Wesley, and then I've taught at Virginia Union. And so it's, I'm among friends. And so I'm very grateful to be here with you for this forum tonight. I also want to thank Dr. Goldman for the invitation, and Dr. Howard, who was instrumental in it from what I understand, and Dr. Janssen for her gracious openness to responding to the words that I will offer. I also must say that my Hebrew Bible professor is here, Dr. Melanie Knowles, and I'm so happy to be with her, and I pray that I will not fail her. And Dr. Cheryl Sanders, who is also a personal favorite of mine. So let us begin. I want to talk tonight from the theme, to make visible and to see beautiful, anti-racist theological praxis and the transformation of the classroom. While the subject of modern racism is not exactly a new topic on the American scene, within the past 15 years, the terms anti-racist and anti-racism have gained much traction within both popular and academic lexicons. The term, from what I understand, was first used in 1943, but it has a kind of currency now at the moment. One of the primary voices deepening, broadening, and expanding the notion is Boston University historian and cultural theorist Kendi Abrams, and two fairly recent books. One is How to Be an Anti-Racist, that was published in 2019, and most recently, and I love the title, Anti-Racist Baby, which was published in 2020. Abrams suggests that not being a racist is not good enough. Abrams argues that being an anti-racist requires both individual actions and systemic changes. Now, the approach I want to take today as I think about this matter of anti-racism and this notion of being anti-racist is I want to approach it through a side door, which is a literary side door. And I want to invoke a couple of texts that I think have much to offer us, windows for thinking about the work that we do in the classroom as we seek to try to engage in anti-racist theology and praxis. In 1952, Ralph Ellison writes his splendid novel, The Invisible Man, in which he explores many of the social, psychic, and intellectual issues encountered by African Americans in the early years of the 20th century. In this fascinating text, I find the text fascinating because he talks about a gaze that he is a prisoner of, but this gaze also renders him invisible. And so there's a sense in which Ellison is both hypervisible and invisible. And this whole notion of Black invisibility, or this notion of invisibility, because often students experience, especially sometimes in denominationally driven theological spaces, they experience invisibility. They are not always seen. And so this notion of invisibility is a state of just not being seen. In a letter penned on the stationery of Atlanta's Ebenezer Baptist Church, dated September 26, 1961, the congregation's young pastor will write to the one-time minister, author, and social critic James Arthur Baldwin. Being deeply impressed by both the rhetorical giftedness and his highly compelling perspectives on American race relations, Ebenezer's pastors would write, and I quote him, "Dear James, please excuse me for taking the prerogative to address you by your first name, but I feel just that close to you. I have just finished reading Nobody Knows My Name, and I simply want to thank you for it. So he reads Nobody Knows My Name, and he addresses James Baldwin by name. That is very important to him. He goes on to say this collection of essays and lectures will certainly go down as a classic on the meaning of the social revolution that is taking place in the United States in the area of race relations. It is written with a lucidity of style and a profundity of thought that inspires any serious reader. Your analysis of the problem is always creative and penetrating. Your honesty and courage is telling the truth to your honesty and courage in telling the truth to white Americans, even if it hurts, is most impressive. I have been tremendously helped by reading the book, and I know that it will serve to broaden my understanding on the whole meaning of our struggle. Concluding the letter with great homiletical flourish, the young pastor would go on to say, and I quote him, "You are not only a great Negro writer, you are a great writer. In the most creative way, you rose up from all of the crippling restrictions that a Negro born in Harlem faces and plunged against a cloud-filled night of oppression, new and blazing stars of inspiration. You make us all proud to be Negroes. With warm personal regards, Martin Luther King, Jr." When Martin King encounters Baldwin's text, "Nobody Knows My Name," that resonates very deeply with him because that notion of namelessness is also something that African Americans, when they enter into certain spaces, and other minorities enter into certain spaces, there is this sense of anonymity that no one really knows one's name. So there is the notion of invisibility, namelessness. And then the same King is also credited in 1965 when asked to comment on the uprising in Los Angeles, the Watts riots, as they were called. They wanted him to comment on that, and he had to say that a riot is the language of the unheard. Invisibility, namelessness, and inaudibility, which is something that minorities, racial and ethnic minorities, often encounter when they enter into these theological spaces. There is this sense, as one person put it, that there is this idea of psychological homelessness. That when you enter into these spaces, you wrestle with issues of acceptance, issues of belonging, and the teacher, often the professor, your lecturer, they don't make it better. You're still rendered invisible, you're rendered nameless, you're rendered inaudible. The ways in which the things are ordered and structured, that you have to do your own kind of supplement your education with additional readings and talking to people about what these different terms mean. That seems like everyone knows, but yet you paid so much money for all of this education. You write papers and you don't get an opportunity to reflect upon the traditions that formed you well enough to get into these spaces. And so you feel often homeless. I think about my own experience as I was preparing for this. I was thinking about when I went to McCormick Seminary. It was a fascinating place. But I went straight from Sunday school to the seminary in a Pentecostal church. And now it was very interesting at that seminary. the majority of the non-Presbyterian students were Pentecostals. It was in Chicago, an urban place. There was one very large church not far from the seminary. The pastor did a lot with McCormick Seminary, and it was that kind of world. But yet, in our readings and in our reflections, we didn't really get opportunities unless there was two people on faculty who created space for us to reflect from our tradition in very deep ways. But that we would talk about what it was like to be in that place and in that space on the margins, and really trying to find the literature that would help us to reflect in the ways that would be meaningful to those who many of us were still serving. We were in seminary during the week, but we were serving in these churches on the weekend. And so we often felt nameless, invisible, and inaudible. As a museum worker these last 4 years of my life, one of the things that I have engaged in a lot is looking at religion and material culture, the sacredness of things, and what things teach us about culture. By looking at things, you can learn a lot about the environments from which these things come, the cultural context. And I began to think about the seminary through the lens of kind of material culture. And I thought that maybe, and I know it's so challenging in this kind of space to have dialogue, but at least to lift up some ways in which we might think about ways in which we could actually begin to recognize the gifts of those, and the talents of those, and the experiences of those that come to study in our institutions. And the first thing I thought about was, when I thought about material culture, is what about when we actually enter into a classroom space or a seminary space? I was invited a couple years ago to Duke University. They were having a retirement of a professor there who had been there for, I think he must have been there almost 30 years, an African American. And there was a lot of excitement because one of the things that they were going to do, a portrait had been commissioned, and they were going to hang that in the halls of the Divinity School. In all of the years of the school existence, there had not been one single picture of a person of color in those halls. And people pay thousands and thousands of dollars. They go into debt to go into this place that is not hospitable in a kind of material way. And so I think that education is one of those things that's like a total experience. And so when you come into a place, you want to be welcome there. You're spending your money, you're coming to be trained. And so you want to be welcome there. And I thought about what would it mean if we begin to think about the material culture in our halls of learning at our institutions. And what would it be like if to bring young students from straight out of undergrad to a place where they could see images that actually that weren't foreign to them, that would actually help them to feel a sense of home. I also thought about, which is a major thing, the roster. Now, I don't know if they still do it, but when I was teaching in the seminary, I would get, at the end of enrollment, a name of each student and the denominational tradition from which they came, other demographic information, which served as a window for me into how I constructed my syllabi, what traditions were represented, what ethnicities were represented. So when we will assign papers, theology papers or history papers, that the students would have space not just to reflect upon, and I taught at a Reformed Seminary in Holland, Michigan, not just to reflect upon Kuyper and Calvin, but to also reflect upon people from their own traditions. And I think that is, I think that's crucial. That, and it requires work, it requires more work of the theological educator. Because if you use that as a text, and you engage it as a text and understand it as a text, the data will help you actually do your work. And so I wanted to offer that to you as one way of thinking about putting together your courses as well. And I suppose we'll have time to talk about it more. And then, of course, the syllabus, that's material culture. That the syllabus is also an artifact. And sometimes the artifact is a very strange artifact. Sometimes you don't see anything that you recognize. And I think that as we, and I was even reading today some of the ATS material about the projections around 2040 and how the racial and ethnic minorities are actually becoming the majority. You probably know about this more than I do. And so I think that that's even all the more reason for us to begin to think about diversity and begin to normativize diversity as we teach. Of course, the course readings. The course readings are so crucial. Often when we assign texts, we have this kind of prefabricated notion of what we're just going to read this, that, this, and that. But what about if we use some of the resources that were available, like Hispanic Theological Initiative, the Fund for Theological Education? The AAR has a tremendous resource where they compile course syllabi, so people who teach can begin to think about other texts that they might not be familiar with. You have the Louisville Institute, Wabash Center, all of these wonderful resources that are available to us that will actually help us engage the students and meet them where they are and lead them to where we're trying to take them. And so I want us to think critically about the kinds of things that we assign for reading as we try to name and hear and identify those who are present with us. The assignments that we have students to write. Now I understand that we have learning objectives, right? That we have things that our students must learn before they leave our classrooms. But this is an opportunity, I think, for us to think about allowing students to put, if there are certain theologians that we're wrestling with, or historians or scholars from different traditions, to put them in conversation with people from their own tradition, people from their own racial or cosmological understanding, so that they'll be able to get what they need to do the work that they need to do, but also they'll be able to do what we need for them to do to evaluate them, so we can allow them to go on to continue in their studies. And so recently I learned of a very interesting notion, and Dr. Janssen also, and I hope she might say more about this, but it is something that the Samuel Proctor, Proctor, what is the Proctor organization called? They had the conference, the Proctor Conference is the word I'm looking for, that they adopted this notion from the Zulu notion of sawubona, which means we see, respect, and value you. That whoever comes into our places of learning, that whoever we encounter, we see, respect, and value you. And in the Zulu culture, they greet people with this notion of sawubona. And they respond by saying, yeba sawubona. And so I encourage you, as you continue to do all of the good work that you're doing, and you're seeking to engage in anti-racist theology, and you're seeking to allow those who have come to us, however they got to us, to be seen, to be named, and to be heard. May it be for you, sawubona. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Issues of visibility and inaudibility, of being not at home are vital. And I'm sure that many of our students do face those. You bring us a very strong challenge to think through that, that experience and the strategies that help overcome and invite people into our courses. I want to now turn to Dr. Howard to introduce our respondent.
Sawubona. Thank you, Dr. Williams. I found another joy this evening in introducing a colleague, a peer, a dear friend. One over these past 2 years in particular, I have grown a deeper affinity and appreciation for as far as relates to her love and her investment, that of Christian education and theological formation. Speaking of our respondent tonight, Dr. Denise Janssen, who has earned her undergraduate studies from the University of Sioux Falls, her MDiv from Northern Baptist Theological Seminary, and her PhD from Garrett Evangelical. She is a Christian educator. She is an author. She is a scholar who currently serves as an associate professor of Christian education at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology. Her research focuses on faith transitions in life, particularly the transition from adolescence into young adulthood through the use of ethnographic research. She also designs and writes and consults in the area of curriculum development and best practices in faith formation in communities of faith. She has over 30 years, although she's about 35, she has over 30 years of youth ministry and pastoral ministry experience, which has equipped her well as a scholar practitioner. She has brought her research to reality, and even her previous years of fundraising to establish the Stream Youth Theology Institute at the School of Theology, which is grant funded through a grant that she wrote to and was awarded by Lilly Endowment. She has authored 3 books, and she is an ordained minister in the American Baptist churches. You have the floor, Dr. Jansen.
Thank you, Dr. Howard, and thank you for the gracious introduction. Dr. Howard is a phenomenal human being. If you haven't gotten to know him already, you need to. It is my pleasure to respond to the wonderful work that Eric did for us tonight in helping us to unpack, to tease out some distinctions related to our understandings of liberative pedagogies, and beyond that, anti-racist pedagogies, those ways in which we must intentionally pay attention to what it is we are doing, such that we are able to throw off gradually over many years, but relentlessly, those things that have clung to us, that continue to allow, promote, collude with anything that might be less than a full affirmation of the humanity of all of our brothers and sisters. And so in the work that Dr. Williams has done for us, I want to just lift up a couple of ideas, invite his continued work with us so that we might further understand, and perhaps offer a couple of questions that we all might consider as we move into our breakout groups. First, I want to celebrate the three frames that Dr. Williams gave us. This idea of invisibility, which he so graciously connected to, so beautifully connected to the idea of sawubona. Sawubona being this Zulu practice of seeing one another. It is said that until I see you, you don't exist for me. So I must see you and acknowledge your humanity, acknowledge your presence, acknowledge the holy in you, if you will. Not dissimilar from this idea of namaste. He offered us an idea of namelessness. Now, names are tricky, as you well know. And in that way that we recognize someone by name, we also make a political decision about what name to give them. We make a decision about who they are to us, a relational decision. So, Eric, are you Eric to me? Are you Dr. Williams to me? Are you Reverend Williams? I imagine there's a nickname. I'm not going to call you here, but the way in which I address you tells you and the people around us who you are to me. So consider the way in which we name one another and what that means, and the way in which name can empower or disempower. Finally, the idea of inaudibility. And for this, I'm drawn to initially a work by Jane Vella, which our brother Greg Ellison beautifully crafted into an idea in his book, Fearless Dialogues, the idea of a fear of plopping. What happens when one plops? Well, I'm afraid it's all too familiar, at least to some of us. We enter a classroom, eager, full of ideas, and we offer ourselves in response to a question, an idea, an aspect of dialogue. And too frequently, Dr. Ellison tells us, people of color in our classrooms experience plopping. I can tell you the same thing is true for women in a predominantly male classroom. We offer ourselves and the room goes dead. And after a few moments of awkward silence, someone picks up the conversation and moves on, as if our comments were not even heard. those three frames that Dr. Williams offered us, I think evoke some questions. And I want to go to an idea that he actually didn't mention tonight, but has mentioned to me before, and that is this idea of theological deformation. I want to just celebrate that idea. The way in which we believe we are being welcoming, and yet what we're doing is a destructive act to those in our midst who come hopeful and are sent away hurt. In those ideas, I think there's room for us to tease out some of our questions. And one question I want to offer to you, Dr. Williams, is this. I don't expect you to do this work for us, but I wonder if you'd offer an idea or a thought about how assignments might look, or what might be required for the professor before engaging in education that is anti-racist. In other words, if what I'm trying to do in my classroom is not just to resist, but to be proactive, then how might that look different? What have you experienced? What have you seen? I want to just thank you once more for your good offering to us and invite us to learn. Thank you, sir.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you so much for your very kind response and for your very thought-provoking question. I think that one of the things that is really important to do when we enter into the space, as we seek to create a space that is anti-racist, is I think there's some kind of group deconstruction that needs to happen. That we need to talk about the seminary as or the classroom as a place of power and a whole history around who's at the center and how the politics of knowledge and the order of things. And I think that we need to do some deconstruction so we can kind of reconstruct a new kind of space for students to engage. And I think that the readings actually help us like nothing else to offer some readings that are seeking to do just that, to create a new kind of reality for the students in the classroom.
I love that the readings are not just optional. I hear you saying require readings. So we're all experiencing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
We've had a couple of questions come in. This is Larry again. And Yvonne, do you want to share what the first question that you want to put before our speakers?
I've already answered one of the questions, and it was, what is the word you're saying, meaning I see you? And I've answered it. It is Sawubona. It's Sawubona. It is in your chat box. It's a Zulu word for I see you. Dr. Williams, is that correct? Did I get that right?
Sawubona, yes.
Yeah, Sawubona. Okay. All right.
And Yvonne, just on that note, if any of the participants would like a link that Denise Jansen has shared with us in our planning with some references to Sawubona and how it is being used educationally, just send a chat to me and I'll send you that link.
Okay.
Professor, the question is, what is the difference between challenging unexamined beliefs in the classroom and being destructive?
I think if you challenge, I think it probably is it probably would be in the approach. If one is wants someone to merely reflect, to simply reflect upon an unexamined belief, I think that's a kind of an approach. But when one wants to be iconoclastic, and you feel, students feel that when something is coming from a place that's not charitable, students feel that, and many times students shy away from reflecting on those things that matter to them and to their communities, because they don't want to be graded for a differing theological opinion. They want to be graded for the quality of their work, and students talk about that. That I don't see it like that, and so I'd rather not write the paper on that. I just give him. He wants John Calvin. I give him John Calvin, and I think that's unfortunate, because again, there's an opportunity for kind of deep education, deep formation that is a missed opportunity, because the perceived kind of prejudice of the instructor.
Excellent.
Go ahead.
Yvonne, would you like to read another one?
Yes. Are there models, platforms of faculty development that are anti-racist or of a non-colonized worldview?
I think there are different disciplines that are engaging in post-colonial kinds of modes of thinking, and I'm thinking of one is this whole notion of missiology, that you have people writing about post-colonial missiology, definitely biblical studies, how we could these different various acts of deconstructions, but an entire curriculum. I'm not aware of one, but I do know, I can't think of the name of the group, but there's an exercise. I think this thing has lasted for maybe a few years, a journey that New Brunswick Theological Seminary went on in anti-racism training. And it was a commitment and a long walk, but it's become, from what I understand from people who teach there, it's given new life to their radically diverse seminary. And so there are organizations that want to walk with people around those issues, but I don't know if there's a model that I will hold up that I know about.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Williams. Another question, and this is to whomever would be able to answer, you or Dr. Jansen. How can we make spaces and institutions hospitable when their history is exclusive and or violent? How can we make spaces and institutions hospitable when their history is exclusive and or violent?
Kind of unmask the history. And we need to talk about this violent history. And then we need to kind of create a new kind of culture. And creating cultures take financial commitments, take diversity hires, and it just kind of engage in the kind of collective deconstruction and recreation of the new community.
Okay. Dr. Jansen, do you want to add that?
Yeah, I offered in the chat the best way, like you can wait for your institution to do it or do it in your classroom. Any movement starts with one. So do it in your classroom. Get a colleague who will dialogue with you. Do it in both of your classrooms. Wow, that's twice as much as you were able to do yesterday. Start somewhere.
Okay, thank you. Another question, what do you think about Hannah Arendt's criticism of collective guilt in post-war Germany because, according to her, it has hidden the real individual perpetrators. What do you think about collective guilt and collective innocence relationship today in the context of struggle for anti-racism?
Dr. Jansen, I think that one is for you.
You are too kind, Dr. Williams. What I'm hearing there is, and I'm not familiar with Dr. Arendt's work, so I'm not going to pretend. What I'm hearing there, though, is what we might call white fragility, and the way in which enforced norms can cover the hidden racism that's within people, and the way in which white folks tend to express their guilt in ways that are unhelpful. Burst into tears, apologize. All of that is a smokescreen for don't push me any harder, I'm hurt. Racism has hurt me in this way. And frankly, that's not a good excuse. We white folks need to face the racism that's in us. And it's almost impossible to live in the US today and not have some vestige of racism or white privilege within us, even just benefiting from the systemic or institutionalized racism of our culture. I'm not telling you anything new. Facing what's in us is this first step. Not shrinking away from it, recognizing white fragility when we experience it, and then moving forward. Recognizing that you will not do it perfectly. You will fail every day. And tomorrow you're going to try better, because when you know better, you can do better.
Another question, along with the time-honored elements of readings and written assignments, what other tools or experiences augment anti-racist pedagogies?
I think that's a fantastic question. And
Pedagogies.
this may sound like a shameless plug, but places like museums, places like sites of protest, places where people are asking, difficult questions about the bread and butter issues of life. I think about when Emmett Till was killed, and they had taken his body back to Chicago. He was at the A.A. Rayner funeral home, and Till's mother had come to identify the body, and she said that she knew that he had suffered trauma, and so she said she would start with his feet, and she would kind of scroll up his body. She said when she looked at his feet, there are very few blemishes, but as she began to scroll up his body, she said she saw both in front of his head and in back of his head, it appeared it has been chopped with something like a hatchet. The face was swollen several times its size, marred and disfigured. Mr. Rayner asked her, he said, "Do you want us to touch the body up?" And she said to Mr. Rayner, "No, Mr. Rayner, let the people see what I have seen." And I think of transformative education is to allow people to see the trouble that communities have seen. And I think that will, that's a different kind of learning. It's a different kind of experience, but it's deep and it's transformative.
There is something this here. It's not so much a question as an expression. I'd like to just share that with everyone. I personally find that the challenge of real estate in curricular materials is one of the toughest challenges faced by professors who want to take a role in anti-racism. Certain canons in a field are necessary for literary in the field, while at the same time, as we are often racially biased, the very scaffolding on which contemporary critiques of white supremacy, etc. stand. One has to cover enough of the canons to teach what needs to be learned there, while also making space for the critical race questions and gender questions to be asked. I find this a monumental task of weighing competing goods as a result of the plain fact that there are limits on time and inquiry. This is not a question as much as an expression of what I find the chief challenge is in my particular field. Would either of you care to make a comment on these expressions?
I think that that is the struggle that many face, and these kinds of questions. I think that organizations like Wabash and some of these other places, they want to help people to think through that what must be taught, and how one dominant voice cannot be heard. It's just it's not acceptable now. And so these are the tough issues. And sometimes I thought about teaching a course once, American religious history, but to teach it from the underside. So maybe that's another approach, that to keep those texts that are part of the canon that must be taught, to look at those texts through the folks on the underside, who reside at the underside of history, the underside of theology, or the underside of biblical studies. And so it's another way of looking at the canon, and I think that will raise new questions.
Can I offer an idea? The mere premise that there's an untouchable canon of old white men that must be known assumes that hundreds of years of other cultures are ancillary. I think we need to start right there with questioning that assumption, that there are some untouchables, and ask why we think that.
Thank you. So students, if you have any questions, this would be a good time for you to enter your questions in. And while we wait for that, I'm going to go back to Dr. Goldman to talk about introductions of faculty members, if that's possible.
Well, I'm going to use my prerogative and ask a question, if I may.
Right.
We have a little bit of time. I did put it in the chat, but I think it just didn't come up properly. I was touched by your, actually challenged by your story, Dr. Williams, of being in a Presbyterian school. That's my background. And the work that I have been trying to do internally in terms of the tradition, we are a confessional tradition, and I do believe in reexamining and reframing. I'm not quite ready to toss those canons out, but I do believe in reexamining and reframing. And I'm sensitive to aspects of doctrine within my own tradition that do not appear, at least to others, to speak of equity. And equity, Dr. Kendi and others have said that that's at the heart of anti-racism. This is a struggle for genuine equity at all levels. And for example, the notorious doctrine of Calvin about election, if spun in its typical way, it has plenty of equity in sin, but not a whole lot in salvation. And so I'm just curious if either of you has a sense of criteria. What's a good criteria for re-examining doctrine and trying to rework it in a way that does speak to equity?
I wish this were the type of platform where I would be curious to know what some of the people, the professors who are in this group, what they think about that, and how they wrestle with that in their own teaching. We can't let people speak on that, can we?
Well, we have about 5 minutes. If
I
anyone,
think that'd be worth
if
it.
anybody would like to respond to that question about reframing doctrine towards greater equity, how have people struggled with that issue?
This is Cheryl Sanders, and I guess because I teach ethics, that's about the main topic I talk about all the time. It's not like, well, let's bring the question of equity. I mean, I don't know how you do ethics without bringing that into the conversation, not as a good idea, but as foundational to why we're even taking this class.
My name is John Hoffmeyer. I teach systematic theology at United Lutheran Seminary. I have two thoughts. One is you never get away from doctrine. I mean, if you think doctrine is not so good, then you argue against it, and then that's your doctrine arguing against it. So I try to, in teaching, help students relax about there being a nimbus around the word. And I say, if it bothers you to speak Latin, just use teaching instead. But the point is, if you say if you say, look, we get hung up on doctrines, we need more equity, then you say, okay, your doctrine makes equity central. So just get people comfortable talking about putting their commitments on the table and letting the power of the commitments argue with each other rather than kind of the haze that comes around a jargony word associated with confessional traditions like doctrine. The other thing I'd say is that fortunately there are all kinds of people in the great cloud of witnesses, past and present, who keep working this stuff. And now this isn't directly Calvin's election issue per se, but Cameron Carter's important book on race and theological account uses the election of the chosen people of Israel precisely to say that idea of a chosen people that has nothing to do with their special biological nature or cultural nature or anything like that pulls the rug out from any privileging creation of a particular privileged race, or really the idea of construction of race at all, and wishes that if early Christian theologians, more of them had followed Gregory or Nyssa and gone with that approach, we wouldn't have gotten in the trouble that we did later on.
Thank you.
Larry, can I offer a thought on that? This is
Yes,
Phil
please.
Wingaya-Rao.
Yes.
Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Williams for his presentation. And I was also struck by his story about how when Dr. Williams entered seminary, how it wasn't that far away from his church, and that kind of dialogue between the local church and the academy or theological education. And relating it back to your comment about doctrine, Larry, makes me think of theological method and what is our starting point. Do we start with doctrine, or do we start with the context? And the methodology for liberation theology is to see, to judge, and to act. So we start with our context first, and then reflect on that through praxis. It reminds me of an old book by Juan Luis Segundo, liberation theologian, the liberation of theology. So he kind of flips it, instead of theology of liberation, the liberation of theology, which allows us to start with context first. And so our doctrine begins with our surrounding. And so in anti-racist work, what's our immediate context and the struggle for racial justice, and then reflecting on that in light of scripture. And then you kind of complete that cycle again, to see, to judge, and to act.
Right. Well, that's a great reminder. Very great reminder. Thank you so much. We do need to shift gears. And I want us to invite the deans to introduce new faculty that are present with us, and let us know other faculty that can't be here tonight that are new. If I could ask the representative, I think the dean from John Leland has had to leave to teach, but Daniel DePauw on the faculty will let us know who is new at the John Leland Center.
Well, thank you, Larry. We have Dr. Andy Lamb, who is the new adjunct professor for Leland and will be teaching philosophy of religion, God's existence, and the problem of evil this spring. Dr. Andy Lamb has a PhD in philosophy from Notre Dame and JD from UChicago. We're so glad that Dr. Lamb is able to join us. I think Dr. Lamb is with us. Obviously, it's hard to see Dr. Lamb, but maybe we can see Dr. Lamb at some point. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. If we could invite the Dean of the Pontifical Faculty of the Immaculate Conception, Dean Petrie, to share news of new faculty.
Thank you, Larry. Yeah, since our last meeting last year, we've actually had 5 new faculty members join the Pontifical Faculty. They're all Roman Catholic priests of the Dominican Order. We have Father Gregory Schnackenberg, who has a doctorate from Oxford University. He is teaching church history and also working in our pastoral studies area. Father Reginald Lynch, who I believe is on with us this evening, and I think is helping out with the systematic theology small group later. Father Reginald has a doctorate from the University of Notre Dame. He teaches in systematic theology and historical theology. There he is. Father Michael O'Connor is teaching in moral theology and also in pastoral studies. He has a doctorate from the Angelicum in Rome, the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas. And then finally, we have Father Austin Litke, who's teaching in patristics, ancient languages, and also some pastoral studies. He is currently finishing his doctorate at the Augustinianum in Rome. And Father Cajetan Cuddy, who teaches in systematic and moral theology, is concluding his doctorate right now, preparing for defense, I believe, at the University of Fribourg in Switzerland. So those are our 5. So we're doing okay. We're grateful to have them.
Congratulations. Thank you. If I could ask Dean Melody Knowles of Virginia Theological Seminary to give quick introductions.
Thank you, Larry. Last year we brought 4 scholars onto our tenure track, 2 of whom are here this evening. Dr. Liz DeGaynor, she's in the field of practical theology and Christian formation as assistant professor, and also Altagracia Perez Boulard. She currently serves as our director of contextual ministry and also assistant professor of practical theology. We also have someone visiting us this year as a visiting professor from Samuel Proctor DeWitt School of Theology, Dr. Adam Bond, who's associate professor of church history and our Martha Horn visiting professor in church history this year.
Excellent, thank you. And Phil Wingaro-Rayo, can you introduce your new faculty at Wesley?
Yes. Well, I'm going to start with somebody who is not new, but has assumed a new position. Andy Klinkland has been with Wesley for quite some time, but he has recently been promoted to the library director position. As some of you know, James Estes, our previous library director, took a position at the Library of Congress this past April. And so if you need something with our library, Andy Klinkland is your first point of contact. And then I'd also like to introduce Dr. Devin Apps. She is visiting assistant professor of art and theology, and she's also the assistant director of our Luce Center for the Arts and Religion. And she received her PhD from King's College in London, England. Also is Dr. Tim Snyder, visiting assistant professor of practical theology. And Tim got his PhD from BU in practical theology and congregational studies. And he is heading up our religious workforce grant, a grant that we received through the Lilly Foundation. Our most recent addition to the faculty is Dr. Laura Holmes, and she receives the award for moving the furthest away. She comes to us from Seattle Pacific University in Seattle, Washington, and she moved in the middle of a pandemic across. But she is professor of New Testament, and she has been in academia quite some time and received her PhD from Princeton Theological Seminary. So welcome to all three of you, and Andy is not new, but congratulations on your promotion. So that's new faces at Wesley.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not aware of new folks. Let's see, Kieran, any new folks at ULS?
Well, we have to welcome our new president, the Reverend Dr. R. Guy Irwin, who has been with us from August. And we are delighted that after 3 interesting years, we now have a permanent president.
Welcome, welcome, President
Thank
Irwin.
you. It's good to be with you.
I believe that is all the new faculty that I'm aware of. Any of the deans have anything else to add?
I would add at RTS, we just hired or just brought on in June, Nathaniel Gray Sutanto. He's currently in Indonesia, and because of the travel block right now, he's not able to come, and also was not able to join us tonight. But we're thrilled to have him as a professor of systematic theology. He did his PhD at Edinburgh on Herman Bavinck and epistemology under James Eglinton there. So we're thrilled to have Gray join us.
Excellent. Thank you, President Red. Well, we are at a time we want to welcome all of you new faculty to the School of your teaching, but also to the Washington Theological Consortium. We hope that you will find colleagues to share and energize you in your fields of study. We want to shift now to our faculty breakout groups. We do have facilitators for each of our groups tonight, and the main task is to get introduced or reintroduced, to choose a convener for the year, and then to brainstorm possible faculty continuing education event for your group. That can range from sharing papers together for feedback, or bringing someone in, or visiting a site of learning. We have a little bit of money for these groups, between $200 and $300 per group. So if we can support that effort at the consortium, we will. Yvonne, I'm going to turn it over to you to move us into our groups.
Thank you, everyone. As you can see, I'm trying to get us unstuck off of the showing everyone. So I will start my video so you can see me, hopefully. What we're going to do is you've all been pre-assigned to a group. There may be 1 or 2 of you who we did not know about. And what we're going to do now is go into the breakout rooms. I will send you a reminder of what time it is, so you'll know when it's time for you to break. You have facilitators that have been pre-assigned, and if there is not one that has been, you can certainly decide on your own who that person could be. And we'd ask that you do that, spend a little bit of time, and around about 8:35, you'll hear from me, and you'll have about 5 more minutes at that point to actually come back into the larger room, and we will close out at that point. So hopefully everyone is okay and ready to move. So if there's anyone that has any questions, could you unmute yourself and ask those questions at this time before we go into breakout?
As I did, I want to invite each of the group facilitators to just send me a quick email while you're thinking about it, about any ideas you do have kind of brewing for a continuing education event, and if anyone was identified, to convene the group for this year. For newcomers, our faculty groups are one of the just added benefits of this 50-year-old organization, where people get to know colleagues outside of a guild setting, which sometimes has different dynamics of collegiality than the guild, and we invite you to take advantage of colleagues in your area. We also invite faculty groups to consider topics that they would like to see addressed at next year's faculty convocation. We always invite groups to be generative in that way, and we think of ways to facilitate that happening. I'm grateful for everything tonight. I think my kitchen just signaled that we should end, and so any final, we do want to ask if Dean Howard, are you still with us? He may have had to go off. He has a couple of new indications of faculty members. Yeah.
He's here. He's here.
Oh, good. Dean Howard, if you can just share quickly your new faculty members that you emailed me, and I apologize again.
Oh, no, they were individuals who made tenure. Dr. Young Kim from New Testament.
Excellent.
Dr. Robert Wafanaka from Old Testament and Hebrew Studies, and Dr. Patricia Gould Champ of Practical Theology. We're in the midst of a faculty search now, 2 full-time faculty members. So.
Excellent. Well, I think it's a very healthy sign for our schools to have new faculty in this number joining. There are many seminaries that cannot say that, many theological schools, and to have searches underway. And we're really inspired to keep that, that strength and support it in every way that we can. Students, I invite you to share with me any thoughts that you have. I'm sorry that more of our students who signed up, we had about 20, signed up, couldn't. We got several emails about difficulties, but if there are any way to keep momentum moving forward for you as students, please let us know. Thank you again, everyone. I wish you a good evening. And there's one announcement, I think, from Phil. Do you have an announcement from Wesley?
Yes, this Wednesday evening is the vice presidential debate, and our Center for Public Theology is hosting a watch party. It's going to be chaired by Dr. Rick Elgendry, our director of the Center for Public Theology, and we have 4 panelists that are going to be analyzing the debate. And so I'll put the link in the chat. It's free, but we do ask that you register, and you're also welcome to invite students if they would like to participate.
Thank you, Phil. And I'll be happy if you could email that to me as well. That would be great. I can send it out more widely. Thank you again, everyone. Blessings on your work. We're so deeply grateful for everything you do.